Hello, everyone. Dan Pierce here. Really excited for our talk today. We've got Dr. Michael Verbora, Medical Director at Field Trip Health. And with that said, let's jump right in. Dr. Michael.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm joined by my assistant, Bradley, and his Stuffy. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited today to share my expertise and knowledge with a new frontier in medicine, which is psychedelic medicine. And it really is a potential paradigm shift in how we approach mental health. And I think now more than ever, we really need more options available to patients. And I'm going to walk you through some of the challenges we see today, a little bit about psychedelic medicine. What is a psychedelic? What is an experience? How can we help patients use these drugs safely? And what are the outcomes being seen to date in the literature? Okay, a little bit about me. I'm a family doctor by training, and I graduated about 6 years from U of T in family medicine, and I was really inspired to look for other options other than, prescription pills for patients. And I just felt so frustrated prescribing so many pills, and I just didn't really feel like a lot of patients were getting better with chronic illnesses. And so I was hoping, I could find alternatives, and I moved into cannabis, which was a beautiful alternative to opioids and benzodiazepines, which are highly addictive drugs for pain and anxiety or sleep, respectively. And this has led me to this point where, I'm going deeper into that pursuit of more knowledge on other drugs that might be just as safe as cannabis and also as therapeutic. If not more. So let's talk a little bit about psychedelics. So what is the word psychedelic? We can break it down into its root terms, psyche and delune, which means mind and soul manifesting or revealing. And Bradley is actually a perfect example of a psychedelic state. So a young brain has, doesn't have the rigidity that older brains has. It has far more mental flexibility or neuroplasticity is what we use to describe a whole host of opportunities for mental states. And so young children are really living in more of a psychedelic state where they don't have these fixed preconceived notions, and so they have that mental flexibility. Everything they see for the first time is through an unbiased, a non-judgmental lens, and they get to program whatever that experience is. But with time, what happens is that what we call default mode network sets in, and it creates rigidity, and it reduces our mental flexibility, which makes it sometimes hard to adapt to new situations. When someone undergoes a psychedelic experience or enters a psychedelic state, which does not have to be with a drug, you can get to psychedelic states just through breathing, meditation, religion. What usually happens is there's an intense sensory change or perception. Sometimes people have what we call hallucinations or visions, but there's meaning hidden in there, and everybody has a different experience, but it's about understanding what that message is or that meaning for that individual to guide them on the path that's going to help them heal. So why is this important? Well, I want to frame the mental health challenge that we have today, because we all know it's bad, and we know that almost everybody's dealing with one mental health issue or another that fluctuates with time. But COVID really has exacerbated that. So what does the data show? That shows that overall, even though we have a ton of antidepressants and treatments, 55% of patients are relapsing after their second antidepressant. And after 4 months, that's the average time that it takes for a patient to relapse after their second antidepressant. And the other frustrating thing for patients, especially those who feel really suicidal, is that it takes 6 weeks for an antidepressant to kick in just to know if it's going to work. So if you're acutely suicidal, 6 weeks feels like a lifetime. It feels like eternity. And is there a solution to really help people who feel very, very depressed and suicidal to help them get better quickly? And we're going to talk a little bit about ketamine, which might be that opportunity. Okay. Looking more at the data, what happens when a patient goes on a medication? The probability that it's going to work is actually rather slightly better than placebo. But after the first medication, 40% of people will relapse. After the second medication, that increases to 55%. After the third, it's 65%. And after the fourth medication, it's 71%. So what this slide is really illustrating is the fact that after you take more and more medications, the probability that you're going to find something that works is just less and less. So what is the pandemic doing with respect to mental health? We have 3 times the rate of depression since the start of the pandemic, a threefold increase. We have 3 times an increase in suicidal ideation from 2018. And 53% of Americans are reporting that their mental health has been negatively impacted by COVID. And as a family physician, I can tell you that 70% of my day, my visits with my patients are about mental health today, more than ever. I feel like I'm becoming a psychiatrist out of necessity. What are the unmet needs in mental health? So we already talked about the fact that, drugs work slightly better than placebo. Unfortunately, the therapy that usually is very helpful for mental health disorders is expensive or inaccessible. At least here in Canada, we tend to really rely more on pharmaceuticals, and we put money into those, and healthcare plans tend to fund those a lot more aggressively than therapy, sadly. But there's also other areas outside of depression and treatment-resistant depression, which is depression that has not responded to at least 2 pharmaceuticals. Other disorders, such as eating disorders, such as anorexia, bulimia, or PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, we do not have high-quality, evidence-based pharmaceutical medications to really help. So these patients really, really suffer because we don't have a lot of good options to date. And so what I'm really hopeful for is a lot of research is taking place in the psychedelic world on these, disorders that affect a wide range of patients. And currently they don't really have good options. And the sad thing about eating disorders is not only is it such a huge mental health problem, it also has the highest rate of morbidity and mortality. So more people die from, eating disorders than any other mental health disorder. And what is the socioeconomic impact? I think we all intuitively know that this costs a lot of money to try to manage people's mental health. But if you look at the healthcare costs, absenteeism in the workplace, lost productivity, short and long-term disability, changes in quality of life, and what the quantitative factors are around that, it's 50 billion a year in Canada, and over 200 billion a year in the US. So there's massive opportunities to really help. And so this is Field Trip Health. This is the company that I'm, very fortunate to work with. This is our vision to help people through psychedelic therapy. And this is what we do. We bring people in, we provide them a very specialized space. We give them eye shades so they can work internally. We give them earphones so they can listen to specially curated music. And we put them in a zero gravity chair to relax them. And then we give them the right therapies or drugs. So this is that paradigm shift. So the old current day approach is we're going to give people a pill like an antidepressant. We're going to hope that passively is going to make you better. You're going to hopefully forget about some of the problems that challenge. We're going to wait, weeks and weeks and weeks to see if it works. And sadly, millions of people are still affected despite all that approach. And the new approach, the paradigm shift that's taking place is a much more active and engaged approach. And this is, you're going to take this drug, but you're going to do a lot of hard work. It is very intense. You're going to confront head on the challenges, the barriers, the past traumas. You're going to try to face the music, and we're going to try to work through them, reprogram our brain to get a different perspective on that, to try to make us healthier and to live a more meaningful life. So this is a much, much different approach to the way that we do things today. And the whole approach with psychedelics is to work through the problem very intensely over 3 to 4 weeks. And hopefully you get, 6 months, a year, 5 years of relief. And there's data from some of these drugs and studies out there that show even as long as 5 years from just one dose of a psychedelic can be very therapeutic. So what we're focused on today is ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, because that's the only legal psychedelic that we have today. And so I'm going to walk you through a little bit about ketamine. So ketamine is a drug that was invented many, many years ago, 60 to 70 years ago. And it was actually designed because we needed a safer anesthetic. And the challenge was most anesthetic drugs bring you closer to death. So they slow your heart rate down, they lower your blood pressure, they suppress your ability to breathe, and you need an anesthetist to watch you, because if one of those goes wonky, you might not wake up. So ketamine, what was beautiful about it is it had the same anesthetic properties, so people could still do surgery and go under, but you didn't have the respiratory cardiovascular issues that you do with traditional anesthetics. We use it every single day in high doses in the emergency room in children, but in our clinics we're using much lower doses than even children would get in an emergency room. And so it's very safe. Kids use it all the time, usually for like a fracture or something that needs to be reset in the emergency room. And what's really remarkable about it is for the past 21 years, we've known that ketamine is an antidepressant, but for whatever reason, we never did enough, transference from the clinical world, the research world to the clinical world. And it's only over the last 4 or 5 years have we started to see these ketamine clinics pop up. And I'll talk a little bit about the differences between them. And what's beautiful about ketamine is it's not just modulating serotonin like an antidepressant typically does, but it also affects other neurotransmitters such as dopamine and glutamate. And glutamate is that super neurotransmitter that has the ability to regulate a lot of the brain's neurochemistry. In the US and in Canada now today, there's a product called Spravato. It's a nasal spray developed by Janssen, which is a Johnson & Johnson company. So you can take a nasal spray now. It's approved as a drug for treatment-resistant depression and acute suicidal ideation. And at the end of the day, what happens with all psychedelic therapies, ketamine included, is that we get these changes in that default mode network. And what happens is the brain has the ability in a very short window of time to enter a neuroplastic state, so that childlike state. So just like I mentioned, the child's brain has that neuroplasticity and it has so many ranges of freedom to go to. We can teach an old brain new tricks when we give them psychedelic therapies. But it's so important that you have a therapeutic team with you to help you, because what I worry about is people taking the ketamine drug, getting into this neuroplasticity state, and then being left on their own to try to figure out what to do. So here's some of the research. I'm not going to go into it. This is some of the research that's out there that shows the neuroplasticity that ketamine is an antidepressant, and that it actually changes the brain in overall in a positive way. Can you hear me okay? Thank you. Sorry, headphone issues. So there's two approaches with ketamine. So what's interesting is you have these IV ketamine clinics that are just doing the same thing that we've been doing for, the last 50, 60, 70 years, is just giving people the ketamine and then saying, okay, the ketamine is going to make you better. So that's that biomedical approach. And I honestly believe it's becoming an outdated approach. The new approach is psychedelic assisted therapy or ketamine assisted therapy. It's giving them the drug, but doing the therapy. And what's so interesting is that all the antidepressant research out there that shows antidepressants work was done with therapy, but yet we prescribe it too easily, and we don't end up allowing patients to get access, sadly, to the therapy, which I think is really what's helping. So antidepressants also help the brain enter a neuroplastic state, not as fast as ketamine or psychedelics, but it also helps with neuroplasticity. But if you pair it with psychotherapy, you're going to get way better outcomes. And so we're taking a very novel approach at Field Trip Health. We're using ketamine injections in the US, lozenges in Canada due to some regulations. Patients have about 40 to 60 minutes of an experience or a journey. They dissociate, so they disconnect from everyday thoughts. And every single day, 96% or 97% of the thoughts we have are exactly the same as the day before. And that's that rigidity that we have as we age. And then what we do is we add therapy in there. We recognize that things are going to come up. Emotions might rise to the surface, but you need a therapist to help guide you and coach you along that path. Sorry, 1 second here. Here, I have a wallet and an iPhone. Okay, so this is what it looks like. We give the molecule, the psychedelic molecule, which is ketamine, and we do this with psychotherapy. We control the set and setting, meaning making sure that the patient's in the right mindset and willing to change and ready to change, because there's no point in taking a brain that's going to help you change if you're not going to change your life, if that's the main issue that's preventing you from being healthy. And then we control the setting. We develop a beautiful space in all of our clinics to welcome you to a very novel space that feels different but safe. And that's important too, because you could take the same drug, same dose in a whole different other space that you don't have control over, and somebody else can influence your experience. So when you hear about these bad experiences with psychedelics, it's always set and setting. Was the person in the right mindset, and were they in the right setting? Going to a music festival might be a really interesting experience. It could be a beautiful experience, but you're losing control of the setting. That's not going to be therapeutic the same way that a clinic is going to be able to control. And what we really believe in is that each of us has this inner healing intelligence. Just like when you have a cut on your hand and the body has the ability to heal a cut, we know how to heal our own mental health wounds as well. It's just harder to access when the brain's in a stress state. And so what we're trying to do is find whatever path works for each patient. There is no, two people have identical pathways. There's common themes that come out through these experiences, the sense of being reborn, spiritual awakenings, the sense of old memories coming back and being viewed from a third person's perspective. These themes are there, but nonetheless, each person really takes a different path. How we deliver this is we do 1 or 2 psychotherapy sessions up front to understand that mindset, and we help coach you and make sure that you're ready for it. And we're not going to take patients who, want to get better, but they know that they don't have the tools or the support system around them at this time, or, they have other things that are going on that are, taking a higher importance. We need a very, very strong commitment to the program because it's intense, but if you want an intense outcome, it's going to require intense investment of time and resources. And then we do these 6 ketamine sessions. So it's 2 a week, usually for 3 weeks. And what we're doing is we're escalating the dose with time to try to get to a peak psychedelic experience. We don't shy away from that. We don't consider it a side effect. All the literature shows that the more dissociated people have, or the more mystical an experiences with ketamine or psychedelic, it correlates strongly with clinical outcomes in mood. And then in between each of those 2 sessions, we don't use the drug, and we just talk about what happened through a very special psychotherapy program we call integration sessions, where we try to integrate the learnings of the psychedelic experience into that individual's day-to-day life. So this is what that looks like. So that's 13 visits at minimum, right? And at the very beginning, we do have everyone see a psychiatrist to make sure that ketamine's safe for them. It is for over 90% of patients. To date, we've treated hundreds of patients across a number of clinics. We haven't had any serious adverse outcomes, fortunately. And that just speaks to the overall safety of the drug and the careful thought and attention that we put into selecting patients who are really ready for this program. So what are the potential benefits and risks of psychedelics in general? And this is ketamine, but also psychedelics as well. The potential benefits is that enhanced mental flexibility, rapid antidepressive, anti-anxiety effects, really helps people facilitate mental health and trauma work. And it reprograms that default mode network that, when your brain is kind of wandering into space, but it's still thinking about some things, and there's been functional MRIs that show that, we're reprogramming that, okay? And that's where we think a lot of our mental health issues arise, because there's these constant places that we visit that are so hard to change. What are the side effects? Well, nothing's perfect. Everything has side effects. So sometimes psychedelic experiences can cause a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry. It can cause some stress. It can be emotional. They can be very difficult experiences. We always warn people, like, if the door is presented during your experience, if you want to get better, you got to open the door and go through. And, otherwise you're just ignoring something that's under the surface. If you want that release mentally, physically, that the tension that's stored in our body and our minds, you have to go through the doors that open. Right, Bradley? And then lastly, there's some physiological changes that happen with ketamine. And usually that's some changes in heart rate and blood pressure. But, to date, we haven't had any problematic issues with it. We don't understand the long-term risks of using psychedelics. But by and large, most people are they're not using a ton of psychedelics. They'll come through our program, they'll take their 6 doses, and we might see them back in 6 months or a year for 1 extra dose as a booster or something. But by and large, if you do the work, you have the psychedelic experience, it's not like a drug where you're like, oh, I want to do that again right away. You're like, no, that was a lot of hard work. I'm glad I got what I needed to get. I'm going to stay away for a while because, it takes a lot out of you, but it does make people better based on the data. So this is some of the data that we have from our program. So these are depression on the left, as well as anxiety scores on the right here. And so what we're seeing in this is we're seeing depression coming in, it's about 17 out of 27, I believe, on this score, PHQ-9. And you're seeing them drop dramatically during post and even 1 month follow-up. We're seeing dramatic drops in everyone's depression on average. And then if you look at the anxiety areas, we're also seeing very, very similar correlations. What does the data show? This is some IV ketamine versus placebo, and this is just some of the early studies that demonstrated that ketamine was an antidepressant and better than placebo. So here's some evidence here as well, just to support our outcomes, which matches. So psychedelic medicine is really the next frontier, and Field Trip Health is, it's a remarkable story. It's a remarkable company. Our number one asset is human capital. The people who we have in our organization are just top notch, the very best educated in the psychedelic space. In such a new space, there are, believe it or not, academic programs around the world, but very hard to get into and very niche. And we're blessed to have so many people in our network that are just so committed to, making psychedelic drugs accessible and to really help people access that inner healing intelligence. And our organization is divided into 4 major groups: Field Trip Health, which is the clinics that we run where we do the real magic and the work, the hard work. We have a Field Trip Discovery component, which is, a drug design component, looking at psychedelic drugs and seeing if we can research and study some of this. And we also have a lab in Jamaica where psilocybin is legal and the main ingredient in magic mushrooms, which is also a huge contender for, healing people. And we're looking at that as well. And then we have Field Trip Digital, which is, providing digital tools to help people reduce their anxiety or depression and to monitor long-term outcomes. And then Field Trip Basecamp, which is a division that's really focused to trauma and veterans. And so we have special niche services because that community is a little bit different. And then if you look at drugs in general, a lot of people get this perception that, psychedelic drugs they must be so harmful because they're illegal and, they're Schedule I drugs in so many places. But, Dr. Nutt, a UK professor who used to work for the government before he published this data, showed that opposite, all the legal drugs like alcohol and tobacco, they cause, immense morbidity and mortality to individuals, which is the blue line. Okay. And they also cause a lot of harm to other people in that social circle. That's alcohol, right? Like, you drink and drive, you're not hurting just yourself, you're hurting other people that you potentially get into an accident with, and the lives around you are also affected. So alcohol, by and large, is the single most dangerous drug that we have available, and it's legal. And if you look at all the psychedelic drugs like ketamine, ecstasy, LSD, mushrooms, which is psilocybin, they are dramatically, magnitudes of less harm to individuals and to others. And most of the harm comes just from the laws, like the criminality of it. It's not even the biochemical properties, right? And so you might have been told that, this is your brain on drugs, but all drugs are drugs. So just because something's a pharmaceutical and it's regulated one way, or, it's a natural health product, or it's an illegal drug, I just don't think that the way we've categorized and regulate things actually speak to the actual risk and benefits of these drugs. So, a lot of us grew up in this time where, just say no to drugs, and, nobody won the war on drugs. So this is what your brain actually looks on drugs. It's not an egg in a frying pan. What it is this is what a placebo looks like when you take it, and this is what psilocybin looks like. And what you can see is tons and tons of communication to areas that don't normally communicate. So the brain just gets all these beautiful insights because it's like, oh, I didn't realize, that, I thought this way because of XYZ, and I didn't realize that perhaps, that individual that I'm, carrying down had their own problem. Like, it just gives you this third person perspective when you're under the influence of these psychedelic drugs that is so valuable, because we always believe that our perspective is so true, and sometimes we need to take a step back and get that third person or bird's eye view to kind of expand out and realize, hey, a lot of this could be very inaccurate, and I've formed my identity into all of these potentially inaccuracies, and maybe I need to be a little bit more flexible and don't overcommit to things and don't develop such strong emotions towards things that I don't know are true or not true. And that's really what this brain is showing you in a very complex way. So what does the future of psychedelic medicines look like? Well, this is psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy. So that's the main ingredient in magic mushrooms. We can see depression scores dramatically dropping over months and months with the use of just one experience, which is remarkable. And then if you look at psilocybin therapy as well, this is where we're really interested in psilocybin and magic mushrooms. We think it's a very, very safe molecule, not regulated the same way as ketamine and other drugs. So there's some advantages to it. Also grows in your house or your backyard if need be. And there's evidence to show that you get really long-lasting improvements. Some of the studies out there compare them to antidepressants, and people who have failed 3, 4, 5 antidepressants after 10 years of experiencing depression take 1 dose of psilocybin, maybe 2 doses, and have 3 to 5 years of improvement. And they rate the experience, typically 80% will rate it as one of the top 2 to 3 life-changing experiences of their entire life. Okay. What do patients say when they go through our program? It feels like I have direction now. I understand that I need to continue working on this in the future. For the first time and as long as I can remember, I feel happy. The brain fog has finally lifted. This isn't your average clinic. I can't explain it, but I can tell you it was the most productive therapy session of my life. And that's probably the most accurate, is that this is therapy on steroids. This is therapy on psychedelics. It's drug-assisted psychotherapy. Psychotherapy is really what's healing people, but the drug is just rapidly accelerating. And instead of doing 5 or 7 years of therapy to get the insights that you need to, you can do this in just 1 or 2 sessions, which is remarkable. And then I mentioned a little bit about our Field Trip Digital. We have an app if people are interested. It's just called Trip, TRIP, and it's just a place for people to meditate and unwind and do some guided meditations. And we encourage our patients to do these type of things as part of their long-term health and wellness plan. And then we have a digital portal for all of our patients. And if you're really interested in learning more about the space, I would sign up for our podcast, which is remarkable because we have the top people across the globe that Ronan Levy will interview. And it's really remarkable to see what others are doing in this space, because it's like rapidly accelerating right now. And it's just so hard for me as someone very interested to just even keep up with everything that's going on across the world with research and innovation. This is part of the members of our team. I can't go through everybody, but again, we're so blessed to have such passionate, well-spoken industry leaders who are, advocating for accessibility, good quality research, and are doing a lot of the research. So our advisors are, exceptional. And then this is what a clinic kind of looks like, just to give you a poke inside. So that setting is so important. You can't just do a psychedelic drug in a space that you can't control. You need to be in a space that you feel comfortable with. And so we've really designed our clinics to help facilitate that. And today we have clinics in LA, Chicago, Atlanta, New York, and then Toronto as well. So that concludes my presentation. I got some contact information there for anybody else who's interested. And thank you for being a part of it. And thanks for putting up with some of the noise and little guy running around. I appreciate that. And please reach out, connect to us. We'd love to hear more about, how you're helping others or how you want to get involved in this space or where you think it's going. So please share what you think. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Michael. Do you have time for a few questions from viewers?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So the therapists are wondering where they can get certified to offer this kind of therapy or to be involved in this kind of therapy. Are there certifications involved?
Yeah, it's challenging, right? Because it's a new field, and so there's not like, one authoritative body that says this is your basic minimum. So it's a bit of mix everywhere. So, I think the gold standard is there's a program in California called CIIS, California Institute of Integral Studies, a very intense, very expensive program for people interested in psychedelic like therapy or to be involved in the space as a clinician or a religious individual or a therapist or a doctor or a nurse. So that's who they cater to, but that's very academic and that's the highest level, I would say. There's other organizations such as Fluence, so FLUENCE, run by excellent psychotherapists, part of the programming I've done as well in my education. And I think they're mostly based out of New York, but everything's virtual today. So they run some online programs as well. And then MAPS is the other program as well. They have, MAPS is the leading organization for research to date. And they're doing a ton of studies, and we're actually going to be doing an MDMA anorexia study, which I didn't have a chance to go over today, here in Toronto, which I'll be a part of. And so MAPS does a ton of training for therapists as well. I think there is a wait list. I think it also can be a little bit expensive, so there's a bit of barriers there, but that's like the gold standard in research, psychotherapy, what the studies are doing. And when these drugs come online, therapists are going to want to emulate the same psychotherapy components that took place in the research. And I think that's how these drugs will be approved. It won't be, you just, go to the pharmacist and get this drug. This will be, you get the drug from your clinic, but you got to do the therapy with it because that's what the evidence is being built around. So hopefully that gives you at least 3 places to look if you're interested, but also connect with us because, there's always opportunities and we're always looking to expand our network of psychotherapists, and we're developing programs, before patients come in, after they graduate. And so we could always use help as well for people who are, non-judgmental and are going to help people with psychedelic therapies. If we can build that community as well, it would really help our patients.
Excellent. Another question, thank you. Another question is, what are the best peer-reviewed articles on this topic? I know you mentioned and cited a few in your presentation. Are there any other articles or sources for articles that you recommend?
Yeah, I would just go to the MAPS website. So if you go to MAPS, which is the Multidisciplinary Center for the Study of Psychedelic Drugs, or something along those lines, it's a mouthful. So MAPS, if you just go to their website, you can look by molecule, you can look by condition, and they'll list all the various studies that are available. It's honestly too much to even list at this point, but it's important that you do. If you want to really get educated, I would encourage you to go to those primary sources. Sometimes the media, does one thing or the other. They either sensationalize the results and say that it's going to cure everybody, which is not true, or they do the opposite and one person gets harmed in the study and they say it's going to hurt everybody. So you can't really trust the headlines. So you should do your own, research, but good research by going to those primary articles. And they're all listed on MAP's website as a nice place of organization, I would say.
Excellent. And we'll make sure to link to all of the resources you mentioned when we post the replay link as well. We have a couple more questions. One of them is there a potential ever for a bad trip?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? And patients fear that. They always worry what happens if X, Y, Z. And so in the community, most of us say and believe that there's no such thing as a bad trip. There's only experiences that we can learn from. And sometimes, yeah, they can be painful and they can be very difficult, but most of the patients that have them are also going through immense pain every single day. So what we're hoping for is that when they go through this painful experience, it might be very emotionally charging, but there's that release so that, they go through it, they face it, be it a demon or whatever you may call it, the tension, the stress, they face it, and then they walk out a lot lighter so that they're not facing that every single day. But a lot of us just, get into the habit of burying those problems below the surface, and then, we blow up out of nowhere of something small. And it's like, we forget how many months, years, decades previously that was an issue that we kind of buried, and it just compounds. And so, that's why it's also so important to have that set and setting, because if you want to minimize like really bad outcomes and negative experiences, you want to control the setting and you want to look inward. Like, there's probably tons of medicinal value and recreational value to taking a psychedelic drug and going to a music festival. And I can speak from personal experience how nice that can be back in my old days. But you lose control. And all it takes is one person in the crowd to look at you the wrong way or something to happen that's bad in that scene. And like you are no longer in control and your brain is in this neuroplastic state. And, you're not going to die from the drug, but you could have some very serious mental consequences if you don't have control of that environment. So don't take these drugs in spaces where you can't control it, because again, something can happen and then the experience you were hoping for ends up becoming the opposite. And so that's an external experience. When your eyes are open and you're taking the drug, you're downloading data and hoping that you interpret it different. But our work is all internal work. It's closing your eyes, shutting down the downloading, and looking at the data you already have and trying to reprogram or refrag that hard drive so that things are smoother inside. And so that's a very fundamental difference there. And I think we do minimize negative experiences. And even when people have really difficult experiences, they might shed tears, they might cry, but after a couple of visits, they say, you know what, like that was really painful that day, but like I'm looking back on it and like I got a lot out of that experience. And so it really, again, it just teaches them something new about themselves. And so we don't shy away from them. We hope people don't have, bad experiences that last a long time. We haven't had that, but bad experiences in general aren't usually, something we think are harmful. We think they're beneficial.
Great answer. Thank you. Another question from Stephanie is, where are we at with FDA approval? She has heard that it's close for treating depression and PTSD.
Yeah, we're very close. So it's going to be drug-based and condition-based. So everything the FDA is like the drug plus the therapy for that condition. So, we're only probably a year or two, maybe 3 away from MDMA being approved for PTSD. I think people are saying 2023 is the year we'll have enough data. And then psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression is probably, give or take the same amount of time from a medical perspective. But, that's one channel, the FDA pharmaceutical route. That's the route we've all used to. But the world's different with cannabis, right? Like cannabis paved the way for a lot of new pathways. And so you're seeing politically, decriminalization and recreationalization or medicalization before all that data comes into the FDA. And so, in Oregon and other places, in a year or so, like there's going to be a medical program for psilocybin, irrespective of the data that comes from the FDA. There's enough evidence to date for them to they passed a law that says, hey, we can use this drug in a medical fashion. We're going to do everything that's being done in the studies, and they're developing that program today. So it's interesting. We're going through multiple paths. My biggest fear out of that is like, I just don't want, everybody really quickly, jumping on psychedelics and doing it without the right knowledge and understanding and the right space, because, we've been at this moment before in history, right? Like, 1960s, we had, Summer of Love and the waking up and tuning out experience. And it was just too much, too fast. A couple bad things happen. Next thing you know, like these drugs are back and unable to be researched and studied, right? So we just have to be conscientious of being patient, going through the right channels, getting the data that we need to collect to demonstrate their safety and effectiveness. And then, there'll probably be multiple streams for multiple people, and there'll be recreational streams for some people. There'll be very medicalized streams with, hopefully insurance coverage, drug coverage. And then there'll be something maybe in between. I don't know. So, but yeah, like the FDA channel, it's coming in the next 2 to 3 years for at least MDMA and psilocybin.
Excellent. Thank you. And that's a really interesting parallel to where we're at today in history versus the 60s. That's very interesting. We have one final question. I think this is a good one to end on. Kimberly would like to know, how can she get in on this as a patient?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just I have our email there, hi@fieldtriphealth.com. So just reach out to us and send us a line, and we'll walk you through the process. And our patients go through a process which I demonstrated. It includes a referral with some information that we review. You see one of our in-house psychiatrists to make sure that it's going to be safe and that it's the right therapy. And then if you're approved and it makes sense, then you can go through the program. So just reach out to us. And we also have tons of information on our website that explains everything in far greater detail. And yeah, our goal here is to get this message out to as many people. We know treatment-resistant depression and other treatment-resistant mental illnesses is making up a huge proportion of patients. And a lot of people aren't aware that this exists. And this might be, a very compelling option for most people, rather than taking your 4th or 5th antidepressant, doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different outcome, right? Like we know what that is. So this is just another option, and hopefully hope for a lot of people who may benefit.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Michael, thank you so much for your time and sharing your knowledge and expertise with us today. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we can get you back in again soon to talk about more of the latest research when it comes out.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. Take care.
Anytime. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you next time. All right. Feel the sound.